Hello Kindred, longevity lifestyle designers. This is Government Hero Secrets of Longevity.com. The topic of breastfeeding is one that I've never spent too much time on because it seems like one of those topics that the majority of people, and especially the people who would view my channel, would be pretty logical on and just understand that it's something that is an ingrained part of human physiology, that it should occur when someone has a child. But you know, I'll branch out and talk about things that aren't directly related in the core to longevity on my channel from time to time as it pertains to health, and that's what this video is about. And throughout the video I'll be making references to some studies as well as some sources I'm countering, as well as one of my videos. So all those links will be below in the drop down menu, numbered as I go through them in the order that I'll be presenting this in. So because there's still a lot of discussion in the mainstream, I'm hoping that a lot of non-subscribers of mine do find this video and are informed by it on just how ridiculous it is when you hear about these things like mothers being shunned in public places for breastfeeding for indecent exposure. And you can see why those of us who have a shred of reason and compassion for the proper development of the youngest additions to our society, why we would be so appalled by people that are opposed to this. I mean, let's not even talk about the fact that women's breasts shouldn't be seen as any different than men's in terms of exposing them in the public view. It's nipples are nipples. Yeah, I understand the vast majority of the socially conservative minds tend to be hyper-sensitive around this topic, probably because they have their own trauma from early in life when they were denied the breasts from an early age, or were taken off it early, or were spanked by their mothers. So that could be a factor that's in behind some of these stances, which to those of us with any shred of reason and understanding the science just think is absolutely ridiculous that people still hold those views. So right off the top, we're going to talk about the much accepted decrease in infant mortality with breastfeeding. The longer you breastfeed, the less likely your child's going to have sudden death early in life from a variety of reasons. So that's link number one below. I'm not going to go too much into the details of each study, but just trying to get through this video and give you the references if you want to look at this in more depth. Now, one thing I've come across is that there's many mothers out there who are so selfish about their appearance, they're willing to force their child off their breast because they fear their breast sagging later in life from the act of breastfeeding. Despite the fact that there's no correlation between that, breast sagging is largely due to hormonal issues, but also the overuse of bras with basically atrophying the various tissues that keep the breasts plump and high up on the chest. I've talked about that in past videos. You can always look through my playlists on hormonal and sexual health on my main channel for that. And links number 2 and 3 below are an article in a large study showing a vast number of diseases are prevented or reduced in frequency in mothers who breastfeed liberally, and it actually goes higher the more they breastfeed in life, the lower their risk for a whole array of diseases, but most specifically breast cancer. So if you're really vain and you want to preserve the look of your breasts, you want to breastfeed because there's less likelihood that you're going to have a mastectomy later in life. So if the profound benefits that breastfeeding has on your child doesn't convince you to breastfeed and also breastfeed until they wean off the breast themselves, then definitely consider the fact that your own health is at stake. I mean, we already know that women biologically are designed, unfortunately nature is sexist in this regard, that nature wants women pregnant throughout their adult lives, but there's vast benefits from having children. It reduces breast cancer, and that's specifically because of the increase in progesterone that the body produces during that period, which combats high estrogen levels, which obviously are strongly correlated with all cancers, but most significantly breast cancer. So if you decide never to have children, or you only want to have 1 or 2 children in your lifetime, as obviously that's more the trend nowadays, you want to be using progesterone cream in the times that you aren't pregnant or breastfeeding. That's something that you cycle on and off, about 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. Always consult with your physician or medical professional before starting that, obviously. But also consuming foods that would help boost the production of progesterone are phenomenal for long-term health and prevention from not getting pregnant at some point in your life, or not breastfeeding enough if you have gotten pregnant. So if we want to keep appealing to the social status image that some women try to go for if they're going to not breastfeed. I'm not trying to sound facetious here and being kind of like rude, but it really perturbs me when I hear about these things and the mentality some people have, and in this case it's just women, around certain things just so that they can fit into certain social stereotypes and look good on the ladder of vanity. Yeah, if you want to have a smart kid that you can boast to your friends about and be the talk of the town for them having high grades, you've got to breastfeed them as much as possible. IQ's been strongly correlated with longer term breastfeeding. That's link number 4 below. Now, like I mentioned, I kind of just ignore all the rhetoric and BS that is spouted by all sorts of people that are anti more natural lifestyles. But this was really shocking to come across because I didn't realize there was actually a side in medicine that is anti-breastfeeding. I thought it was all just like this weird, outdated, sort of Christian fundamentalist type mindset that doesn't want to see breasts, that, you know, maybe it's a bit of our modern culture that wants to put feminine beauty on a high pedestal, and therefore mothers are pulling away from child rearing because they think it has some negative effect on their image. But no, it's not these two camps. It's actually coming from a medical paradigm that people are skeptical of breastfeeding. They're skeptical of these practices that have long-term proven effects throughout ancient cultures. So link number 5 below is just a link to a skeptic blog, the Skeptical OB. It's funny that the initials for that are SOB. Perhaps that was an unconscious projection of this pseudo-skeptic in creating it, labeled herself an SOB. So the stance she has is that breastfeeding does nothing for a whole wide range of things. She talks about very slim correlations that we shouldn't worry about and have to change our lifestyle to accommodate. It's like, well, you're only looking at a few things. So there's definitely some areas of breastfeeding research that there needs to be more research, and it's a difficult thing to research because you're either talking to people as they're older saying, how long were you breastfed, or how long did you breastfeed your child for, and it's difficult to determine those things because people's memories are skewed to some degree. So you need these studies that start at birth and look in the long term. So you have quite a bit of research that looks at once you're born and then leading up to several years after that and the effects in childhood that breastfeeding a lot or little or none has on the developing child. But you don't have these super long-term studies that are that concrete. And that's something that's going to change over time because research advances and gets better at these things. But because there's certain weaknesses in areas, that doesn't give you reason to dismiss what slim correlations there are. And not to mention that this medical professional completely glosses over and doesn't even talk about some of the more profound findings that I've already started to link to around the benefits of breastfeeding. And people who have taken the stance of being anti-breastfeeding have even created a word that they label people lactivists, people who are pro-breastfeeding. And you see this in a lot of different streams of debate when people want to disengage from reason-based debate that is detached from the actual stance. So when you start getting into ways of dismissing and ignoring the opposing side, things like giving the other side a label just to put them into one category and treat them as ridiculous, new age or frou-frou, or whatever you want to label them as, in order to have that image in your mind of them being not very good on the science, very hippy-dippy, etc. And you see this in the circumcision debate too. They call them intactivists. These are just people that want basic biology to be accepted for what it is and what nature's done to be accepted for almost certainly being the most optimal solution and the way things should be done. And it's only if you can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that things change from what's natural. So link number 6 below is actually one of my videos I did in the recent past talking about the appeal to nature fallacy and why it does have a place. I'm not saying you use the appeal to nature to disregard science. I'm saying you come from a place on any topic, when it comes to health at least, from the place of what's natural is what we do, and science needs to show us when we deviate from that. So the medical paradigm wants you to think that, oh, we need to prove breastfeeding's healthy before you breastfeed. It's like, no, this is something we've done for the entirety of our species past. To deviate from what we do naturally, you have to have the evidence that proves that is hindering our health or our species advancement. You need overwhelming proof that something has no benefits before you start snipping it off. Talking about circumcision here. You need absolute proof that breastfeeding does nothing before you start advocating for people to not do it. There's not even any detriments to breastfeeding as far as we know, except that people think it's a hassle and bad for their personal image. Like, how fucking selfish is that? You have to wonder the cold, calculated, bizarre, anti-human, anti-child attachment mentality that has to come from this type of person to advocate this stuff. It's disturbing. What must have their childhood been like to warrant the mentality to try and convince other people to not allow their children to develop properly? That's getting into the realm of child psychology and attachment parenting and a whole wide range of topics which are beyond the scope of this video, but it really kind of lights my fire, so to speak, on how I feel about the issue, as you can see. So link number 7 below is what I originally came to this topic for. I wanted to know if there was evidence of increased longevity in people who were breastfed as a child. And like I was talking about earlier, there's a very limited amount of research on breastfeeding when it comes to the ultra long term, so there's no proof of this yet. I'd suspect, and my theory would be, that there would be an increase in longevity from breastfeeding just from the intuitive understanding of it's part of what people do. So when looking at this, the researchers couldn't find direct evidence for this, but they did find that men who are breastfed are likely to have lower risk of dying from accidents later in life. So that is a plus. Everything we're talking about here, whether or not the study comes through and shows the absolute glaring positive benefits of something, some of them fall short, but they're still showing little benefits here and there. So everything added up is significant. You can't deny that. So links number 8, 9, and 10 below are all relating to the research on cardiovascular disease. There's been one area of contention more recently over the years has been around whether cardiovascular disease is reduced later in life from having been breastfed as a child. There's some strong studies on the pro side, as some of these are, and there's been a couple studies that bring into question the way those studies were done and whether there's the proper control set up. And so really there's no evidence that there's no benefits. It's this questioning of some studies, so there needs to be more research done. So there's still no stance for not breastfeeding your child, as is glaringly obvious from anyone that spends any time objectively looking at the research. It's very clear that the studies show higher rates of having good HDL later in life if you've been breastfed more. You have a reduction in a number of risk factors associated with heart disease. You have lower risk of type 2 diabetes. And link number 11 below shows something that clearly leads to problems with heart health, is being breastfed leads to lower risk of being overweight. So being overweight correlates with heart disease. Breastfeeding correlates with lower risk of being overweight. You can make that conclusion then. Let's be reasonable. Let's be realistic. Let's stick to the facts. It's quite tiring that I have to say this, and sometimes I'm hesitant to make these types of videos just because to me it's obvious, and why should I have to even bother to put out something like this to convince people of it? I do because I want to convince people of it, but I'm sometimes wonder if I'm just throwing pearls before swine with this kind of thing. But those of you who hear this who find yourself in a discussion or debate with someone about breastfeeding, you can always link them to this video. That would be very helpful. I'd appreciate that a lot as well. But of course, you can always use the links in the drop-down menu below to support your own stance. We need to get this information out there. We need to counter and even malign the people that try and speak out against breastfeeding, because it's not even something that is a pro and anti thing. It's not like there's debate on whether something's beneficial or negative. It's either beneficial or it's neutral. And why would you want to advocate something neutral? It's like these people just don't want to have a connection with a child. It's like this stoic, cold, Victorian-era perception of the adult and the child, and they're like these two separate species. It's outdated. And we need to further humanity by really paying more attention to the children and our future generations so that they can fix the problems that were dumped on us from our ancestors who had these fucked up ideas from their own trauma. And trauma gets passed down generation to generation, but we can begin to heal that through the parent-child bond that should be occurring and should be developed. So let me know what you think about this video in the comments below. Like, favorite, and share the video if you feel so inclined. And with that, I'll talk to you next time. Take care and embrace life without limits.